Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman. I teach AP Biology, Honors Biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. And this is AP Environmental Science, Unit 2, 2.4, Ecological Tolerance. Let's look at it. So, what is ecological tolerance? Well, it's a range of conditions, particularly abiotic conditions. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. That an organism or a species can survive if it experiences some sort of physiological stress. And it's going to start physiological stress, and then at the upper limits of that or the lower limits of that tolerance could experience death, right? So you can see this graph here. It's easy to understand. There's an optimal range, and then you have some, we're going to get into this more. So ecological tolerance. So what are some abiotic factors? I think this is really important because when I ask any group of students to list an abiotic factor, a hand will go up quickly, like so fast, before I get the sentence out of my mouth, and they will say rocks. Of course, rocks are non-living. We get that. We get the word that abiotic means non-living. But a rock really isn't a factor in an ecosystem. I guess it could be, depending on the ecosystem. But when we're talking about abiotic factors, we are talking about things like what you see on this picture, right? Wind and water, sunlight, atmospheric conditions, temperature, soil, and even more specific than that, like water is just a very vague thing, right? But what about the flow rate of water? What about oxygen content? What about pH, salinity? With the wind, what kind of wind is it? Is it a lot of wind? Is it a little bit of wind? Is it no wind at all? What about sunlight? If you're in the poles, it's really non-intense. If you're at the equator, it's very intense sunlight. Soil, does it have nutrients in it? Does it not have any nutrients in it? Is it frozen? Is it thawed? See, there's all these things, right, that you could start to name. And all organisms are going to have a particular realm of tolerances associated with these things. And so you have an optimal range for a species that they say this is what we like, right? Outside of that, you have a zone that causes stress, right? So think about our own condition. If it's 72 degrees outside and sunny, a little bit breezy, I mean, I could live there my whole life, right? With no real stress. But as soon as you get below like 50 degrees even, there starts to be a little physiological stress, right? It starts to be a little cold. When you get above 90 degrees, there's some physiological stress, right? And you get the idea. Below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, there's real stress, right? You can't be exposed to that for very long without dying. Above 110, the same kind of thing. You get the idea. And that's just temperature. And so this is what we mean when we're talking about tolerance. So a couple ways to think about tolerance. Individuals have tolerance, like an individual whale or an individual oak tree, right? Or an individual person has a particular range of tolerance. I use the pain scale as a great example of this. If you're familiar with this, because you've probably all been to the doctor and they say, describe your pain, scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being the worst pain possible and 0 being no pain at all. And if you give 10 different people the same injury, let's say you scrape your knee, they're going to describe that in different ways, right? Based on their experience, based on the physiology of their body, right? And so that's what we mean by an individual tolerance. There's going to be a wide range of individual tolerances, right? One whale can deal with a certain amount of temperature differently than maybe another whale of the same species, right? So that's what we mean by individual tolerance. Species tolerance is going to take all of those individual tolerances and sort of come up with an average, right? Sort of come up with a baseline for the whole species, like a range of tolerances. This is what you expect to see, right? So the range of tolerance is going to look like this, whereas the optimal range is going to be at the highest bit of the curve, and of course then you have the more or the zones of stress, and then you have the zones of intolerance on the outside of that based on this, right? And so that's going to be different depending on the stimulus that's being observed. You know, a population of trout may have tolerate water temperatures from 5 to 20, But this individual over here really likes it from 12 to 16, right? You get the idea, I think. Now, environmental change is obviously going to have a lot to do with this. Understanding how an environment changes is going to help us to understand ecological tolerance. Depending on how the environment changes, that is going to change the way that species distribute in that environment. If species have a very low tolerance range, then you're going to expect them to be in the place where there's the least amount of change in those conditions. Whereas if a species has a high tolerance range, then they're going to be able to live in a wide range of conditions. Great example in this part of the country is something like white-tailed deer. They have a pretty wide range of tolerances because we have a wide range of conditions here. We have temperate zones, so we have cold winters, hot summers, and the deer live here all year long, right? But there are some animals, like some sorts of birds, that migrate. They go south when it gets cold, right? Because they have a shorter range of tolerances. And so that's important to understand how that works. So let's look at a couple of examples from this. Here's some salmon. Salmon spend a lot of their lives in the ocean, which is salty, and then migrate up into the freshwater zones, up into their original spawn point in order to reproduce, which is freshwater. So salmon have a very wide range of salinity tolerances, right? You take a tropical fish and stick it in a freshwater tank, it will die. But you take a salmon, it can live in either one. Now, there's going to be tolerances there, right? There is such a thing as too salty or not salty enough. And so that is something that salmon have to deal with. But their range is going to be fairly wide with that particular abiotic factor, salinity. Here's a picture of a Seguro cactus, these giant cactuses that when people ask someone to draw a cactus, they're going to draw one of these, right? They're kind of the poster child of cacti. They have a very narrow range of temperature and precipitation. They live in one place in the world, right? And so the temperature has to be a particular range for the whole year. Precipitation has to be a particular range for the whole year, and they will thrive there. If you go a little bit further north, they can't live. If you go a little bit further south, they can't live. And so very, very special range versus a very wide range of tolerances. Let's look at some practice. A passage. So this is why this reads a little weird. Is there's a particular skill that has a student read a passage and then come up with a claim the author is making, right? And so obviously you can't put a whole passage on a practice problem, and so that's why we have this. So you get the idea. A passage explains that polar bears are increasingly unable to find food due to melting Arctic sea ice. The author argues that polar bears' survival is threatened because they depend on stable ice conditions. Which concept from the ecological tolerance best supports the author's claim? Pause the video. All right, here we go. Polar bears are becoming generalists due to food scarcity. Probably not, right? Probably not, since they live in an area that has a low range of variability. Polar bears are reaching the edge of their tolerance range due to changing abiotic conditions. Perhaps. Melting sea ice only affects the habitat, not the species itself. No. Optimal range of sea ice has increased. Doubted. B is the correct answer. Hopefully this was helpful. We're going to be doing 2.5 very shortly. Thanks for watching.